I'm gonna light some holy incense here from Bethlehem. If you'd like to purchase some, I'll put the links in the description box below. Just to set the vibe and have God bless us tonight. Let's get this video started, guys. Hello everybody, I'm Cassidy. I am the Hippie Catholic. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe to be part of the conversation. So one of you guys actually requested for this video to be made, and I'm really looking forward to covering this topic. Thank you so much for the request, by the way. I really appreciate it. Sorry that it took me a while to get to your request. I've been struggling with my mental health like a lot of you guys, and I've just really been trying to take care of myself and reground myself in my spirituality. I hope for you guys to all do the same because that's extremely important, to do for yourself. If any of you guys have video requests or video topics you'd like me to cover, any other business inquiries, feel free to email me. My email will be in the description box below. So this video is a response to the popular YouTube channel Ascension Presents. I like some of Ascension Presents content. They do have a moderate conservative leaning. There's more liberal moderates and there's more conservative moderates. Like, I would say like Lizzie's Answers is probably like a more like liberal leaning moderate, whereas like Ascension Presents and like Brian Holdsworth are more like conservative moderates. I should say conservative leaning moderates. It's kind of, it's silly. With Ascension Presents, I don't have any like bad blood with them or anything. Like, I don't think that they're a horrible Catholic platform or anything. I do think that some of their content can be a bit problematic. They do a sort of similar thing like how Catholic Answers does, where they act like that they are the end-all be-all on the topic, like that they know everything about the topic. I guess it's a little frustrating for me because on my platform our motto is let's start a conversation, and I feel like that a lot of people in the church, including theologians and priests and sisters and cardinals and stuff, there are conversations being made in the Vatican about social issues that they sometimes don't get the credit or recognition that they deserve. There's this false sense of consensus sometimes on issues presented on Ascension Presents, and that's a little frustrating in my opinion because it doesn't feel honest. We're going to be talking about a very controversial topic in the political sphere, cannabis. The video I'm responding to is a video released by Ascension Presents called Can I Smoke Marijuana? I'll use cannabis or weed as opposed to marijuana because marijuana has a very racist history, and we'll get into that later on in this video. So let's dive into Ascension Presents video. So they start with a quote from Pope Francis about drugs.
Here I would affirm what I've stated on another occasion: no to every type of drug use.
Why do you gotta pull my man Francis in here like this? Here's the thing, I agree and I disagree, but it also has a lot to do with semantics. I'd like to make the point that alcohol, according to many health professionals and legislators alike, is considered a drug. Alcohol, as we know, is very much embraced by Catholics. Cigarettes are also acceptable, even though they offer hardly, if any, health benefits and actually harm the smoker's physical health. So where do we put cannabis? Is it in the same category of drugs as cigarettes and alcohol, or is it in the category of hard drugs like cocaine and heroin? Where do we put it? 2020 has been a time for me, and a lot of coping mechanisms that we used to have at our disposal are no longer available to us anymore. Something I've taken up has been smoking cannabis. It's legal in my state. I've had very good experiences with cannabis, and it has really been helping me cope with my onset of depression and anxiety caused by the quarantine. It has not impaired my functioning, and I have not developed a dependence on it. I know some people that have addictive personalities can develop a dependence on it, and that is a different issue that, needs to be addressed. But, I function normally with it. I wake up from smoking weed feeling great and energized and well rested and ready to confront the day without as much anxiety because, it helped me sleep. I think that when we consume or partake in any activity, we really need to ask ourselves, what is this thing? What is this thing's essence? Why am I using it today? For me, I view cannabis in a similar way to the way I view alcohol or even a pill like ibuprofen. You use it occasionally, and you only use it when you fully, freely want it or need it, and other resources have been exhausted. I also want to say this, cannabis is not for everybody. If your body is telling you that it does not like cannabis, stop using cannabis, okay? If cannabis is causing you to make bad choices and not take care of yourself or impair your ability to love yourself and others, then I would stop using cannabis. However, this doesn't mean that cannabis doesn't help some people. For example, I was prescribed Zoloft to help my OCD. However, I started to have bad side effects with the Zoloft, so I was told to get off of that medication. That doesn't mean that Zoloft doesn't work for anyone. I have loved ones who take Zoloft every day for their mental health disorders, and they need it to function and live well. Zoloft just was not for me. But I would by no means say, oh, Zoloft is terrible, you should get off of it if it's working for them. You know, everybody's chemistry is different. Let's get into another clip.
Here's what Pope Francis has to say. He says, "Let me state this in the clearest possible terms. The problem of drug use is not solved with drugs. Attempts to legalize so-called recreational drugs are not only highly questionable from a legislative standpoint, but they fail to produce the desired effects."
I definitely agree that the problem of drug abuse isn't solved with more drug abuse. So, I mean, I definitely agree with the Pope on that. All medications and drugs in general help manage symptoms, but they don't get to the root of the problem. Ibuprofen might dull the pain, but it doesn't get rid of the cause of the pain. It just treats the symptom of the pain. And that's kind of the way a lot of drugs work. That's why mental health professionals often recommend drug therapy and talk therapy. The talk therapy allows the therapist to help you process the cause of your addictive behavior. And the causes are often personal and intergenerational trauma. So yes, I agree with the Pope on this angle. The solution to drug abuse isn't more drugs on a semantics level. But again, we also must ask what his definition of a drug is. Does that include caffeine, alcohol, and nicotine as well? After all of these substances I just listed have detrimental effects to human health and young mental development. That's why there's age restrictions on alcohol, because substances affect different aged minds differently. And even excess caffeine can negatively impact your brain, especially young brains. That's why always when I was a kid, my parents would not really let me use coffee, even though I was tired and I was a kid and stuff, because caffeine could actually be bad for young developing minds. I did not use cannabis until it was legalized in my state, and it happened to be legalized when I turned 21, so I was of legal age to use cannabis. So I tried to do it as responsibly as possible. I definitely think that there are some truths and wisdom to Pope Francis's statements. Any sort of drug use, even prescribed drug use for mental health concerns, treats the symptoms of a mental illness, but in many cases does not get to the root of the pain itself. And once again, that's why many health professionals prescribe medication and talk therapy to get the best results for their clients. And actually, therapy usually overrules medication in like the priority. And if you have to choose between therapy and medication, most mental health professionals will tell you to go with the therapy over the medication. Because the therapy gets to the root of the issue, which is usually, as I mentioned, trauma, or it's trauma related. Support and therapy really helps us get to the root of the trauma that's subconsciously affecting our lives and can help us process it. Next, one of the priests talks about his own experiences with cannabis.
And I want to start from maybe a personal view of this whole situation as well. You know, in God's mercy, 20 years ago, I had a deep conversion back to my faith. And it was a conversion from a lifestyle that was essentially following the wisdom and logic of the world. And part of that led me into a life where I was living with real ongoing daily addiction which included smoking marijuana daily. And the people that I was in relationship with, good people, but they were also moving in that same trajectory. It was part of what led actually to the grace of conversion, was this growing discontent with this something that I'm looking for that's not quite there. And because it's not quite there, there was this kind of experience of an angst, a frustration, stress, anxiety, whatever. And so the thing I'm looking for and not finding in, smoking this joint or doing whatever I'm doing now means that I have this interior experience where my heart's not totally satisfied, even if I might be distracted while I'm high. And when you come down, you're back in reality with the same interior unrest. This cycle develops.
I don't want to disrespect his testimony because it's his testimony and he has the right to his opinions and feelings on the matter. But I'd like to argue that it's no accident that his conversion happened after being a stoner, because cannabis often helps people think about the bigger things in life. Even recently, I have a habit of suppressing feelings when I feel angry. I oftentimes repress my anger or frustration with situations because I don't want to cause problems. I'll just stuff those feelings down and I won't be as honest about my feelings as I'm supposed to be or I should be, because I don't feel like that I'm allowed to do that. I just have this thing where it's like, oh, don't make a scene, don't make a fuss, just like bury it in. And recently, when I was smoking cannabis, I was speaking with one of my close friends about an issue that was really hurtful, to me, an issue that they were involved in. The cannabis really helped me speak the truth of the matter and really helped me, it was still me. It wasn't like the cannabis was making me do something, but it helped me be able to articulate how I was feeling and be honest and have an honest, truthful dialogue about, hey, you did this, I was not okay with this. And honestly, that kind of just really illustrates how great of a tool cannabis can be for personal development. I've spoken with many people who say that cannabis was the key, the metaphorical key, that led them to a conversion to spirituality and relationship with God, because cannabis really helps you think deeper about the things that really matter for a lot of people anyway. The priest talks about his experience with cannabis really negatively, but I'd like to perhaps argue that there were other factors affecting his use of cannabis. People undereat and overeat to feel better about their pain. Should we stop eating or drinking? That's the question. That's what's so complex about disorders, because it's all gray. There's no one size fits all. And I think that this priest might have an addictive personality. He should also avoid alcohol and other substances, even like nicotine or things like that, I think that this priest should really just be cautious with any sort of substance, not even just cannabis. For me personally, I wouldn't blame it all on cannabis. I'd blame his negative experiences on trauma, unrecognized trauma, which leads to the next part of this video, defenses for the moral use of cannabis. It's important to note that there is no set church teaching that addresses cannabis directly, so the issue of recreational use is very much up to the weighing of the conscience and consulting theologians and medical experts. We need to consider objective facts and statistics as well as subjective personal experiences.
Everybody's asking the question, is this moral? Is this sinful? Is this wrong? But is anybody asking the question, is this helping me grow in my relationship with Jesus Christ? Is this helping me grow in virtue? Is this helping me mature? Is it helping me to grow in the understanding of who I really am before the Lord? If I have the peace of Christ in my heart, the peace the world cannot give, why am I looking for that peace in a pipe?
This is something that bothers me. I'm sorry that we can't all be free running in the sunset because we're Catholics. I'm sorry. Catholics have depression. Catholics have anxiety. Catholics have OCD. Catholics have bipolar disorder. Not being happy is not a moral failing, and it does not mean that you are any less Catholic or that you're any less free. We have amazing devotions that commemorate sorrow and unpleasant emotions. There's the 7 Sorrows of Mary. That's an amazing devotion that I need to get back into because I haven't done it in a while, but it's a devotion that really commemorates the sorrows that Mother Mary experienced in her life in her walk with Jesus. And I think there's a reason why we have these devotions. Being unhappy is not a moral failing. We need to stop looking at it as if it is. There's so much suffering, so much sadness in the world that's been brought to the surface. How can we not be sad? Perhaps sorrow is the appropriate reaction. Sorrow can be sacred. Why else would we have the devotions to the 7 sorrows of Mary if sorrow wasn't important to the human experience? Is Mother Mary any less Catholic because she was sad? Cannabis has helped me and my loved ones get out of depressive episodes. Is cannabis the only resource that we're using? No, but it's a helpful one. I'm going to cite a Catholic blogger I really enjoy. His name is Rene, and his blog is called Coffee and Crucifix. He's a lay Canadian centrist who posts some really fire memes. I mention this blogger's political leaning because there's this misconception that progressives are the only ones supporting the legalization and recreational use of cannabis, and that just simply is not true. So anyway, I'm going to be reading an excerpt from the Coffee and Crucifix blog called "Is Cannabis Usage Morally Acceptable?" I know many of my religious readers will disagree with me on this, but I'm fine with the legalization of marijuana, provided that it is heavily regulated like alcohol and cigarettes. However, that does not mean that I don't believe cannabis usage can have potentially harmful effects on the body, let alone society in general. In a biblical perspective, it reminds me of the passage when the Apostle Paul talks about whether or not Christians are free to eat meat that was sacrificed to idols. In summary, I believe the morality surrounding cannabis usage depends on the intent. Like alcohol or nicotine, I believe it can be enjoyed in moderation, yet can be detrimental when used excessively. I will link the full article in the description box below if you want to read that. Renee's blog is amazing. So this demonstrates that there's a diversity of opinion when it comes to substances like cannabis in the church, and there's a diversity of opinion on many, many issues within the church. I am saying this because often Catholic platforms, when they speak out on issues, often like to act like their opinion is the only opinion. I understand stating church teaching and thus going by church teaching, but cannabis use has very loose church teaching applied to it, currently anyway. It's not like we're Protestants. Plus, it's important to remember that Catholicism is a very sensual religion. We love art, we love music, we love the smells and bells. We fast hard and we feast hard. I think that we also need to be very careful when applying highly philosophical, lofty arguments to everyday experiences. One person's theory is another person's reality. And the fact that we can even try to look at certain social issues from a removed perspective is reflective of privilege. I find that lofty theoretical arguments often prevail over lived realities, which can be unfortunate and can lead to injustice in the church. We need to remember that we need St. Augustine and St. Francis. We need the mountain and we need the soil. I think personally that it's time to listen to the humble soil and the ashes in the bowl, because they have stories to tell and not all of them are immoral. I think that our current Pope Francis's papal name is reflective of a new age in the church, one that does not silence the voices outside the magisterial walls but welcomes conversation and new dialogue. And cannabis is such a great topic to debate because there's so many facets to it, and there's so many ways that it could be helpful to people. There's some health benefits associated with cannabis, including pain relief, easing nausea, muscle relaxation, and it may even fight cancer, though this is inconclusive. Many doctors believe that cannabis is healthier to use recreationally than alcohol, and cannabis can even help people overcome opioid and alcohol addictions. Here's a rather irreverent clip from my best friend Kate sharing her thoughts on the matter.
Anyone who talks to me for more than 5 minutes knows that I have some serious mental problems. I'm severely depressed. Apparently there are some people saying that weed isn't good for your mental health or some weird shit like that. You know what isn't good for your mental health? Depression. And I got a lot of that. And, last summer I dabbled. I had an alcohol problem. I wasn't an alcoholic, but, it was definitely a problem. It was, getting to the point where it was, I was having some issues, clearly. And you know what? Alcohol is way, way, way more unhealthy than weed. I'll tell you why. Alcohol, listen, I'm not a fucking doctor, okay? So just just fucking listen to me. Fucking alcohol fucks with your liver, right? And it's a depressant. Like, what I'm trying to fucking say here, guys, is like, I am going through a lot right now, okay? Let me have my fucking weed. That's all I ask. A lot of people like me right now that are using weed to just like get through this fucking quarantine already. We all just need a helping hand. You are invalidating my feelings a little bit.
I think that it's really important for the dignity of yourself as a human person to really understand and be vigilant of what cannabis is and how it may help or hinder you. Don't make an idol of it, don't live for the next high, but also don't be afraid to experience something beautiful and take a well-educated risk. We are embodied beings, and we need to take risks and try new experiences to thrive. I say this as somebody with OCD, that I'm terrified of taking risks. But I've realized that I have to take risks. That's part of the beauty of life, is to take risks. And sometimes I'll make mistakes. But that's what forgiveness is for, right? So we've addressed how cannabis can affect us on an individualistic level, but we also need to address the systemic issues surrounding cannabis. If you're white and you smoke cannabis, you're a hippie. If you're black or brown and you smoke cannabis, you're a thug. It harkens back to America's insistence that black and brown people are inherently more likely to commit crimes, and it particularly ties to something referred to as madness.
He offered me a cigarette. It seemed like a regular pack. I took a few puffs, and things began to get fuzzy and move in slow motion.
Cannabis criminalization stemmed from racialized perceptions of users of color as threatening public safety and welfare. In the case of cannabis, racial prejudice against African Americans and Mexicans merged to prompt state and local governments to outlaw cannabis usage. In states with significant Mexican populations, such as Texas, Mexican prejudice was a huge catalyst for the prohibition. And then people say America isn't racist. Cannabis is tied to indigenous cultures and was also thus maligned. And the church still hasn't really addressed its history and impact on colonization, but that's for a whole other video. Cannabis has often been used by black people to ease pain from surgeries because the mainline medical establishment in the US is systematically racist. And I guess here's like a small story time. A girl I once lived with told me a story about her aunt who received a double mastectomy at the hospital, and instead of receiving pain medication, the doctor told her just to take some Motrin. Since she couldn't attain the pain medication that she needed, she turned to cannabis as a source of pain relief. And this put her in danger of fines and jail time since she lived in a state where cannabis was not legal. The US system set up black people to fail and wind up in jail because companies can get free labor off of inmates under the 13th Amendment. If you want to learn more about the problem of mass incarceration, please check out the Netflix documentary, The 13th. It does a really good job at really giving like a basic understanding of the issue. Cannabis prohibitions are a key component to mass incarceration, and most states in the US still have strict cannabis prohibitions. For example, South Dakota has very harsh marijuana laws. Possession of even a small amount of marijuana can lead to up to 1 year in jail and up to $2,000 in fines. If you have a stash of marijuana in South Dakota, you could land yourself 5 years in jail. In addition to that, anybody in South Dakota who tests positive for past marijuana usage can be punished under the same laws, even if that marijuana use occurred in a state where it was legal. Another state with really harsh marijuana laws is Indiana. Possession of even a single joint can lead to a year in prison and $5,000 in fines. Over 9,000 people were arrested in the state for marijuana offenses, and ironically, 90% of all burglaries and 85% of motor vehicle thefts are unsolved in the state of Indiana. Meanwhile, Washington was the first state to legalize recreational cannabis in 2012. Despite this legislation, rarely mentioned was the disproportionate burden of marijuana enforcement on racial minorities. Instead, the legalization was focused on how taxable cannabis could be and completely ignored the racial injustice the criminalization of cannabis had caused on communities of people of color. However, in Illinois in 2020, cannabis was legalized recreationally, not only to aid the state's revenue, but also to address the racial injustice and mass incarceration connected with the banning of cannabis. Attitudes and legislation are gradually changing in regards to cannabis, but racial injustice involving mass incarceration and cannabis use is still a very hotly debated issue. It should infuriate you that I, a hippie white girl, is able to sit here and enjoy cannabis and talk about it on her Catholic YouTube channel, while there have been people sitting, and are still sitting, in US prisons at this moment, as I speak, for doing the same thing. Let that sink in. There are people still serving time. This should make you angry. And where does this leave Catholics? I think that a lot of Catholics and Christians in general wonder if cannabis is right or moral to use. And many of us are concerned about whether cannabis is comparable to alcohol because alcohol has been so normalized in our culture. I'm not complaining about that. Still, it's something we need to recognize and discuss. Is it hypocritical to say that cannabis is a gateway drug but excuse alcohol consumption? You want to know the real gateway drug? Trauma. Trauma is what drives us to behave in unhealthy ways and exploit a variety of outlets, whether that be overworking, drinking, overeating, undereating, drinking, or consuming other mind-altering substances excessively. Whatever it may be, trauma is the root of addiction. But not everybody who indulges in a feast has an eating disorder. Proverbs 31:6-7 says, "Give strong drink to one who is perishing, and wine to those in bitter distress. Let them drink and forget their poverty, and remember their misery no more." In the light of this scripture and tradition, the church hasn't been opposed to drinking or even nicotine. However, it did have a brief issue with coffee. The issue was eventually resolved because coffee is delicious. Tying back to the beginning of the video, I understand Pope Francis's caution, but I also understand that the Holy Father is also dedicated to racial and economic justice throughout the world. And the prohibition of cannabis has been one of the biggest contributors to mass incarceration and defilement of human dignity in the US. Ultimately, I think it's up to each of us to examine our own consciences and assess for ourselves if cannabis use is going to enrich our journey with Christ or if it's going to hinder it. For me, I found that it's enriched my experience here on earth, and it hasn't limited my functioning or mental capacity, and it hasn't hindered my reverence for Christ. It's actually enhanced it. Cannabis has been one of my main coping tools that I've been using to get through this really rough time in global history. And it should be noted that my therapist actually recommended for me to use cannabis as opposed to alcohol. With that said, don't operate machinery or smoke somewhere unsafe, as that's just not a logical thing to do. I did not smoke cannabis until it was legalized in my state, particularly because I wanted to take proper dosages and to know exactly what I'm getting. This isn't guaranteed with cannabis that's purchased on the street. And I would also hate for any of you guys to face legal repercussions for using cannabis or even possessing cannabis. If you really want to smoke cannabis in the most reasonable way, vote. So I agree and I disagree with Ascension Presents. I still respect the priest's perspectives, but I hope that mine kind of offered some new insight on the topic for you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider supporting me on my Patreon account. As a small creator, I'm still currently not monetized, getting there hopefully. Any donation would help the platform out immensely. Thank you so much to my lovely patrons, Julia, Derek, Debbie, Peter, Kathleen, the Lutheran Ninja and Jez. You guys are amazing. What are your thoughts on cannabis? Please leave them in the comment section below. I would love to hear from you guys. And also, if you have any video requests for me, feel free to email me, and my email will be in the description box below. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. I am Cassidy. I'm the Hippie Catholic. God bless.